Hi, Founder fans. Jason here. Welcome to Founder of the Day Week in Review, where I will be discussing the last 7 articles published on founderoftheday.com. I'm going to turn my volume down just a little bit because I'm peeking out. Don't want it to sound bad. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to talk about the American Revolution. As I said, the last 7 articles that I've discussed regarding the Revolutionary War. So as people roll in, I do want to note the first thing we'll be discussing today are the essays of Brutus. And I finally finished it. Here, let's pull it up. The Essays of Brutus. I have finally finished getting through the Essays of Brutus. Technically 16 essays, though some of them were in parts, so it's actually 18 different essays arguing against the United States Constitution that I have struggled my way through over the last about 4.5 months, once a week, and I'm very excited to have gotten through them. Not because it wasn't interesting, it was extraordinarily interesting. It's kind of a milestone putting all this work in and finally getting there, and you guys have come along for the ride with me, so I do appreciate that. I am going to be starting a new Anti-Federalist tomorrow, and we'll keep that a surprise for you. But at this point, let's go through it. Let's talk about the essays of Brutus, because this is a summary. So, over the last several months, I have reviewed each and every Anti-Federalist paper written by Brutus. The Essays of Brutus, who again is probably Robert Yates. And these were published, as I've mentioned recently, between October of 1787 and March of 1788. And Brutus and the Federalists are having this Lennon-McCartney style battle in the papers of New York City, arguing for and against the United States Constitution. Now, as I said, I've reviewed each of these independently, but this last paper was kind of a summary, so I'm going to very quickly here go through what each paper's main focus was, just to give you a general overview of what the Essays of Brutus really encompassed. So Brutus Number 1 was kind of an introduction, more or less saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do with this series of papers here, but he does point out the open-endedness of the necessary and proper clause, and it's the first of many times that Brutus says, hey, necessary and proper, anything can be necessary and proper to accomplish certain goals, specifically goals with taxation purposes. Brutus Number 2 specifically attacks the Constitution for the lack of a Bill of Rights, which is very important and becomes important later. In Brutus Number 3, he criticizes representation under the Constitution. In addition to the 3/5 clause, Brutus notes that there will be less representatives in federal Congress than the total of those in the separate states, by which he meant right now under all these different state constitutions we have a whole bunch of different representatives, but if we have them consolidated into what the Constitution says, that's going to be a lot less representation from the people and therefore distance the people from their government. In Brutus Number 5, Brutus proposes that the wealthy would secure control of the United States by using their power to determine the time and place of elections to make voting inconvenient or impossible for the average citizens. Now, this would actually be addressed in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments that Brutus was complaining was lacking in the second paper. And we will see a lot of Brutus's and other anti-federalist complaints do lead directly to the Bill of Rights. And specifically, as we'll get to later, Brutus actually pretty directly affects the 5th and 6th amendments. Before we get to that, in Brutus Number 5, Brutus suggested that the Constitution's necessary and proper clause allowed Congress to make literally any law. As I said, he addressed it in the first paper, and he addresses the necessary and proper clause a lot. But he really hammers home the idea that, okay, if you can do anything that's necessary and proper to raise taxes, you can do absolutely anything to raise those taxes, even if it seems unreasonable. Continuing with this topic, in Brutus Number 6, Brutus, who again was probably Robert Yates, who left the Constitutional Convention, we're not entirely sure, but probably Robert Yates, in Number 6, he predicts that the unlimited power of taxation would put Congress in a position to tax the states out of existence, because they can just put taxes on anything and everything and keep taxing, so not only the people, but the states themselves couldn't keep up because there'd be no money left for the states to tax from the people. In Brutus Number 7, Brutus goes on to detail how to define the limits on Congress's power of taxation. In previous papers, he had stated what was wrong with the power of taxation, but in Number 7, he just goes on to define limits. He says this isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just open-ended. We need to rein it in a little bit. And he very specifically outlines how he would go about doing that. In essay number 8, Brutus criticizes the Constitution's ability to raise standing armies and procure a national debt. Oftentimes, we look back at the American Revolution and think that they hated standing armies and may not have liked a national debt. Now, Alexander Hamilton has become famous recently for his promotion of a national debt in the Broadway musical. But again, a lot of people overlook that the Constitution was written specifically to raise standing armies to fight, or I shouldn't say fight against, to fight for the United States, to protect the citizens with a professional army of soldiers, as opposed to just militiamen sitting on the borders, as Alexander Hamilton argues in the Federalist Papers. Who do you want protecting the borders from not just Native Americans, but the British and the French and the Spanish? Do you want a bunch of farmers who train every few weeks and are there for 2 weeks over the summer? Or do you want soldiers who are paid to soldier on your borders protecting you? That's Hamilton's argument. Brutus very much outlines, hey, no, this is not what we want. And I'm going to move into Brutus number 9, where he gets even more specific into this, because Hamilton argues in Federalist number 24, who do you want out there? And Brutus very specifically rebuts in the papers Federalist number 24, where he says that Hamilton essentially says a standing army could be controlled by the people. And Brutus says, no, they can't be. That's why you need a constitution. If the people could just control things, we wouldn't even need a constitution. What's going on here? And essentially, Brutus says, well, if you look under the Articles of Confederation, there are very specific limits to how many soldiers could be raised by the different states. And it was basically enough soldiers, paid soldiers by the states, not just militiamen, soldiers, to man each fort in preparation. And then Brutus was fine with the Constitution having the ability to raise an army to fight a war, just like the Continental Army was raised in time of necessity. He just didn't believe that raising a standing permanent army in time of peace was ever secure to people. He actually very specifically references both Caesar and Oliver Cromwell, who raised their armies in the first place to protect the people, but then once the people had been protected, things went very badly for the people under those dictatorships that arose. And I will note in number 9, I believe it was number 9 when he's talking about this, where he specifically praises George Washington, who turned down ultimate power when he resigned his commission in December of 1783. In Brutus number 10, Brutus reflects on the history of standing armies. I'm sorry, I got a little ahead. He did not put that in number 9. That's why I have notes in front of me, because it's 16 papers. He has that discussion about Caesar and Oliver Cromwell and George Washington in Brutus number 10. And he also talks about Shays' Rebellion, where one of the arguments for a standing army under the Constitution was to suppress insurrections, like you saw in Shays' Rebellion. And Brutus's argument was, but Massachusetts suppressed Shays' Rebellion. They raised an army of their militia in the time of need, and it was done. Whammy jammy, no big deal. In Brutus number 11, Yates turns his attention to the Supreme Court, and he spends several papers on the Supreme Court. In number 11, he specifically addresses the concern that judges can determine the spirit of the Constitution as opposed to simply interpreting the text itself. Traditionally, in most situations, judges could just, this is what the law says. But as we would learn under John Marshall, and it's still true today, that the Supreme Court ended up giving itself the right of judicial review, which means they get to determine if a law is not only constitutional, but if it's in the spirit of the Constitution. And Brutus thought this was very dangerous. He goes more into it in the following essay, Brutus number 12, where he expects Congress to be weary of the Supreme Court decision when making laws, because the Supreme Court could determine the spirit of laws and turn things down. He thought that Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, would look at this and reflect and say, well, we don't think the Supreme Court's going to pass this, so we're not even going to try, which is wrong. The Supreme Court is not supposed to make laws, in Brutus's opinion, and really in everyone's opinion, even the Federalists' opinion for the most part. The Supreme Court isn't supposed to make laws. The judicial branch, the legislative branch, aka Congress, is supposed to make the laws, and they should not have to consider the opinions of the Supreme Court when making laws. Again, Brutus's opinion, not necessarily mine. Brutus number 12 is one of the ones that are continued in the second paper, where Brutus finds the phrase, to establish justice, the federal courts will slowly take power from the state courts. So Brutus refers a lot throughout the papers to the preamble in the Constitution, especially when talking about the Supreme Court's ability to determine the spirit of the laws. The spirit, in his estimation, can be found in the preamble. And that's fairly objectively true. The whole point of the preamble is to say, this is what we're doing here. And in the preamble, it says they want to establish justice. And in order to establish justice, he's afraid that the federal courts will slowly wean power from the state courts and eventually make the state courts, and therefore the states, obsolete. One of his reoccurring themes also happens to be that eventually the states will essentially be rendered useless because the federal government will continue to slowly, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, assume power from the states. Brutus goes on in number 13 to determine that he talks about the individual's ability to sue states, which the federal government, the Constitution gives individuals the right to do. They can sue states in federal court. And he's afraid of this because when coupled with the aforementioned taxation, eventually states would go bankrupt and, as I said, be eliminated in Brutus's fears. And the reason that suing states is a problem is, at the time it was very common, and in fashion still is common, for states to give out notes, or basically bonds, to people. People would give loans to the states, and the states would give them these notes, but people could then sell these notes. Eventually the state would pay the notes back in interest, but if someone wanted to come calling right now, they couldn't do that under the Articles of Confederation. They had to deal with the states, and there was no higher power than the state you had to deal with. But now you could go to the federal government and sue an individual state for the bond to be paid in full immediately, and as I said, he thought this would eventually bankrupt the states. And Brutus number 14, which is arguably, and from my perspective, the most important Brutus essay, he discusses certain rights that are left out of the Constitution that, from my estimation, really lead directly to part of the Fifth Amendment and all of the Sixth Amendments in the Constitution. Led to the Fifth and Sixth Amendments to the Constitution in the Bill of Rights. As I said, there are links below to these articles. I actually lay out a big paragraph of Brutus's number 14 and the entirety of the Sixth Amendment basically side by side, and you can look at them and say, oh yeah, this is essentially the same thing. And additionally, for the Fifth Amendment, the double jeopardy clause. Brutus's complaints about the lack of these certain rights to protect yourself, to call witnesses, to have a trial in your community instead of being dragged across the country. These struck a chord with a lot of people, even certain authors of the Constitution, like, I don't know, James Madison, who ends up writing the Bill of Rights, very much says, oh, okay, we need to add some of this in because Brutus made such important points. Now, number 14 is also one of the ones that's continued in the second paper, where he makes an assessment that the new court system is unnecessary because the system they had already worked. Now, just because it's a continuation of the same paper doesn't necessarily mean it's the same topic. Brutus tends to jump around a little bit. And in the continuation of number 14, as I said, he doesn't like the idea that we need this new court system because the state courts were already getting things done. In any example that the Federalist paper, he actually specifically references a few of the Federalist papers and examples they gave and says, no, look, the example you're giving was resolved in the courts. So what's the problem here? In Brutus number 15, he claims that the Constitution had taken all the wrong parts of the judicial system of Great Britain. Now, the American legal system is largely inherited from British common law. But when writing the Constitution, there were certain things eliminated. Hey, no nobility. That's a change from British law. But he gets a little... Brutus thinks that the authors of the Constitution got a few things confused with Great Britain. He does not know why judges are appointed for life. They were appointed for life in Great Britain so that the king couldn't come get rid of judges that he didn't like. But one of the reasons they got rid of nobility was to get rid of problems like this. So the judges had no reason to be appointed for life. He had no problem with them staying in office for good behavior, but he did not like the idea of giving them life representation. Furthermore, he didn't like how the House of Representatives couldn't review the court's work, because in Great Britain, the House of Lords could review judicial decisions in the courts of Britain, but in the United States, apparently, the House of Lords, or what we call the House of Representatives, couldn't. Now, this does contradict a little bit of some of Brutus's other arguments, where he is very upset that, as we will see in the next one, I should mention, the final Brutus paper, Brutus number 16, criticizes the United States Senate because it has its hand in everything. It's a little bit legislative because it deals with making treaties. It's a lot legislative. It's the legislative branch, but it's a little bit executive because it deals with making treaties and appointing ambassadors. And it's a little bit judicial because it is the court of impeachment. So if someone is impeached, then the Supreme Court becomes, the United States Senate becomes a court. This contradicts a little bit of his last statement, having the House of Representatives be able to review the court's work, but still, not everything everyone says is logical. And as I said, these seem to be a lot of stream of thought. They were written quickly. They were printed once a week for about 8 months. And that's that. Brutus number 16 ends kind of abruptly. It says, we'll be back to talk more about the Senate next time. And then there is no next time. He just stops printing it. I don't know why. There's no way to find out. We're not even really sure if it's Robert Yates writing these or not. But that, in a fairly long nutshell, is, in essence, the entirety of Brutus, the 16 letters of Brutus, also known as the Essays of Brutus, that were published against the United States Constitution in New York, hoping to unsuccessfully preventing ratification of the United States Constitution. So I do hope you enjoyed that, as brief as I can make it, overview of the letters of Brutus. I'm going to take a sip of water because I really ranked that one off pretty quick. Thank you guys for coming. Hi, TJ. I see you there, but I was right in the heart of it. I couldn't stop. New water bottle, second week. Thank you for acknowledging my water bottle. Let's see. Let's see what's next. Excuse me. Oh, okay. Britches mentioned something last week about... I don't remember exactly what the phrase was, but I do remember saying, well, we'll talk about the Pencil brothers this week. Now, I put Henry Pencil in the picture. He's the brother that dies. But this is going to be fun. So, if I can catch my breath. So excited to talk about it. All right. So, the Wyoming Massacre took place not in Wyoming, but in northeastern Pennsylvania, because this region is known as Wyoming, Pennsylvania. Just prior to the American Revolution, and actually just after the Revolutionary War ends, there were several wars called the Pennamite Yankee Wars between people from Pennsylvania and Connecticut. Pennsylvania and Connecticut both thought they owned what we now know as northeastern Pennsylvania. Spoiler alert, it goes to Pennsylvania because I'm describing it to you as such. But Wyoming put down those differences for a while because the American Revolution broke out. And while we often like to talk about the Civil War as a war of brother versus brother, it was to a degree, but mostly the Civil War was North versus South. The American Revolution was literally brother versus brother and father versus father and uncle versus son, because families had to decide, do you side with the king or do you side with the patriots? And there wasn't really any geographical context for why you might make that decision. Certain places were more heavily loyalist than others, of course, but primarily it was a decision you made. And the Pencil brothers decided to take up different sides. And I bring up Wyoming because there was something known as the Wyoming Massacre in July of 1778. So a group of loyalists and Native Americans laid siege in a surprise attack to some Patriot forces, and the Patriots were massacred. That's why generally it's called the Battle of Wyoming if you're a British person or a loyalist, but it's called the Wyoming Massacre if you're a patriot, because they were absolutely slaughtered. Now, some of these soldiers were able to run away. They jumped into the I believe it was Susquehanna River. Yes, Susquehanna River, and made their way to Monadnock Island. I can never say it. Monadnock Island in the middle of Susquehanna River. One of these people was Henry Pencil. The soldiers who made their way to the island were followed, and many of them were attacked and captured. It just so happens that Henry Pencil was found out by his brother, John Pencil. Henry said, "Brother, I'm sorry. I love you. You're my brother. Don't kill me. Please." Begs for mercy. "Take me with you. Make me a captive. Please just save me from the Native Americans. Don't let them scalp me. Don't kill me." And his brother John calls him a damned rebel and shoots him. And then he takes out a hatchet and hacks his body and scalps him. To which not only the other loyalists, but even the Native Americans were extremely shocked and disgusted. And I don't mean even the Native Americans to talk negatively about Native Americans. I mean it that their custom was to take scalps. And the fact that they took a scalp from his own brother and didn't even let someone else take it was absolutely shocking. Now, everything I told you up to this point has been confirmed. There was a book published in 1909, History of Wilkes-Barre, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, by Oscar Jewel Harvey and Ernest Gray Smith. And they basically went to great lengths to confirm everything I just told you. Now, what I'm about to tell you can't be confirmed, but I cannot tell this story without it. So John Pencil kills his brother in the war, and then the war ends. And, well, guess what? You're a loyalist. You gotta get out. And he flees to Canada. And when he flees to Canada, well, he is attacked by wolves. And the Native Americans there save him. And then he's attacked by wolves again at a later date. And again, the Native Americans save him. But they tell this story about that's the guy who committed fratricide and killed his brother and mangled his body. And then, as the story goes, John Pencil was once again attacked by wolves. And this time, the Native Americans left him there and watched him be devoured by wild animals because they now believed that he was cursed by the ghost of his brother. And that is the fascinatingly, at least half-true, story of the fratricide of the Wyoming Valley. So I hope you guys have nightmares tonight. I'm going to take a sip of this water. Let's take a peek at who's up next. Ooh, Sammy Chase. All right. Sammy, you like that story, huh, TJ? Okay, fair enough. Okay. Excuse me. I don't know why I started getting stuffy while I'm out here, while I'm up here during the live videos. It never used to happen. Oh, apparently I'm starting to get allergies for the first time in my life. That's great. Lots of fun. Let's talk about Samuel Chase. Oh, where did I hit? Okay, anyway. Samuel Chase, the first justice of the Supreme Court to be impeached. So Samuel Chase was a brash young Maryland attorney who got a very interesting nickname for a young man. For whatever reason, and I don't necessarily see it, but his friends took to calling him Old Bacon Face. No, I can't find an explanation for why he's Old Bacon Face. Again, he looks fine to me, but he took this in his early 20s, received this nickname. Well, what's interesting about Samuel Chase is that even at this point, he had a lot of energy and kind of a foul mouth and was one of those people who would kind of rebel to absolutely anything. Lucky for him, there was a rebellion brewing, and the American Revolution gets stirred up. Now, he actually gets sent to the First Continental Congress, and he's a little bit radical for someone to be sent to the First Continental Congress, but he signs the Continental Association and the boycott against British goods. He keeps going back to the Continental Congress and eventually gets to sign the Declaration of Independence. Yes, Samuel Chase. His name is on the Declaration of Independence. Now, he stays in the Continental Congress for several years, but in 1778, he has some shady business practices. He uses insider knowledge that he gets from the Continental Army and his place in the Continental Congress to essentially corner the flour market in Maryland and monopolize it. And at a time when insider trading was absolutely fine, pretty much everyone in Congress was doing it, the fact that he cornered the flour market and was charging prices that were way too high for a wartime economy, it just didn't fly, and it really wounded his reputation. He was removed from the Continental Congress. He went back to private life for a few years. Once the war ends, he gets back in the good graces of his community, and he's sent to England to negotiate with the Bank of England regarding stocks that had been purchased before the Revolutionary War, and the repaying of debts to loyalists who lost their belongings after leaving America, as well as Americans getting their debts paid by loyalists. And he apparently does a really good job with this because he comes back and he's named a judge in Baltimore. He actually becomes Chief Justice of the District Court for the city of Baltimore, and then a Chief Justice of the Maryland Court. So just 12, 13 years after being kicked out of his job for being a little shady, he's now Chief Justice of Maryland's Court. Also, as an always rebel, when the Constitution was being ratified, he was an anti-federalist. He argued vehemently against the United States Constitution. However, the Constitution gets ratified, so he jumps on board with George Washington and becomes a real strong pro-administration party member, which was essentially the name the Federalist Party took on under George Washington. He supports Washington enough where in 1796, George Washington likes what he's doing and appoints him as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He is approved. He starts sitting on the United States Supreme Court, again, during the Washington administration, though just as John Adams is arriving. And this isn't a big deal until Thomas Jefferson becomes president, because Samuel Chase, Jefferson didn't like the Whiskey Rebellion and how they were treated. He certainly didn't like the Alien and Sedition Acts. And, well, Samuel Chase tried some of these people. And, as I said, the Democratic Republicans didn't love this. So Thomas Jefferson claims that Chase had acted indecent in some of his discussions. Now, this wasn't really true. This was really an attempt by Jefferson to, well, ruin Chase's career and get him out of the way. So Samuel Chase becomes the first Associate Justice of the Supreme Court to sit for an impeachment trial. And he actually was impeached by the House of Representatives, but as we've learned all too much recently, the getting impeached by the House of Representatives means you go to trial in the United States Senate. And he did. So we have a Justice of the Supreme Court being tried in the United States Senate for indecent acts as a justice. And, well, the person who presides over an impeachment trial is the President of Congress, aka the Vice President of the United States, who at the time was a man named Aaron Burr, who was just a few months removed from a duel with Alexander Hamilton and technically a fugitive on the run from New York State. So, Aaron Burr oversees this trial, and by all accounts, Burr does a great job. I mean, Burr was a great politician and a very good legal mind, despite what we historically might think about him. And by all accounts, Burr runs the trial impartially, and after all is said and done, Chase is acquitted of all wrongdoings because he argues, and his defense attorneys argue successfully, that every single decision Chase had ever made on the court was done based on precedents that were previously established either in the federal courts or state courts, or even before that in the British courts. So Chase returns to his position as a justice, not being great to Thomas Jefferson for the next several years, until he passes away about 6 years later of what I understand to be natural causes. Now, the impact of Samuel Chase's career is astounding. Not only was this a signer of the Declaration of Independence, who 30 years later is getting tried in the Supreme Court, but the idea that a justice of the Supreme Court cannot be removed from office for what the Declaration of Independence would call light and transient causes is extraordinarily important. And we still have that today, where the Supreme Court does have their security from simply being cast out of their job anytime a new political party comes into power. So that is an extremely brief overview of the life and times of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase. Now, I don't know why I keep wanting to say Chief Justice. It's why I keep stuttering when I say his name. But that's Samuel Chase. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I have to take a sip of water between each and every one today. It's not that cold out, but it's snowing, so it's that cold. It's cold enough where we started the fire back up, even though we were in t-shirts the other day. And when we do the fireplace, the upstairs gets really hot. I will probably be beet red by the time we're done talking about these people. These people whom include Eliza Pinckney. I want to give a big shout out to Misfit, who recommended Eliza Pinckney over on the Discord channel. I forgot to include a link to the Discord channel in the description below, but all my social medias are there and my email addresses are there. So if you guys want to hang out on the Discord, it's a lot of fun. We have, not too much conversation going on, but it's picking up the more people that join. So if you want to join us over there, make some recommendations, people you want me to investigate, I'll be happy to do so. Scratch my nose real quick. And we are going to talk about Eliza Pinckney, an amazing founding mother of the United States. So pop over here, hit my button, let the car drive by. Excuse me, again, apologies. You ready? I'm ready. The suspense. Eliza Pinckney, the woman who brought indigo to the United States. Now, Eliza Pinckney was actually born in Antigua in the Caribbean. But her father was an extremely important man who owned a bunch of property. And since there were some wars breaking out, he was worried about being on an island in the Caribbean where France or Spain could just show up and attack at any time. So he decides to move the family to South Carolina. Now, about this time, he actually sends Eliza Pinckney, whose name at the time was Eliza Lucas, to Europe to get an education. Now, not many women were afforded this type of education. It was mostly given to men, but Eliza did get this education, where notably she talks about her interest in botany. This becomes notable because she goes back and joins her family in South Carolina for about a year when her father is elected lieutenant governor of Antigua, or not elected, chosen by His Majesty the King, and he has to go back and govern. But they have all these plantations, which had many slaves, I do want to note that, in South Carolina. And she's in charge of 3 plantations and all the labor and all the work that's going on there, because just after her father leaves, her mother passes away. So 17-year-old Eliza Lucas is left in charge of these 3 plantations. And she runs them very successfully and becomes notable as a businesswoman. In fact, 250 years later, just about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, she's chosen as the first woman to be selected to, I believe it's South Carolina's Business Person Hall of Fame. Either way, Pinckney starts running these businesses. Again, her name is still Lucas at this point. As a teenager, starts running these businesses, and she gets a few seeds of indigo. And people were not able to grow indigo very well at the time, but she spends several years learning how to grow indigo in South Carolina's climate. Now, indigo seems not like it's important, right? It is, because indigo helps you make blue dye. And for hundreds, if not thousands of years, royalty wore blue because blue doesn't actually appear that often in nature. And if you think about it, you probably think of blueberries right off the bat and a few flowers. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of blue in nature. And even, I understand, people used to think the sky was a shade of gray, but that's neither here nor there. Eliza Pinckney is able to grow indigo. And with the budding fabric, cloth. The word was cloth. I can get it out. In the budding cloth industry in the Americas, getting blue dye was extremely lucrative, to the point where Eliza Pinckney learns how to grow indigo in the early 1740s. And the few years later, does it so well that she grows seeds and sends them to all of her neighboring plantations and says, hey, can you guys grow indigo? And they all follow her instructions. Again, as a teenager, follow her instructions on how to grow indigo. And in less than 10 years, indigo grows from not being able to grow to the second most important export in South Carolina. And 30 years later, by the time the Revolutionary War breaks out, it is rice, and then indigo is 1/3 of the income of South Carolina, all because of this woman's hard work and intuition and planting expertise. And it is one of those cash crops that we don't often think of. We don't often think of rice either, but those are 2 cash crops that are extremely important to the development of the United States. Again, unfortunately on the back of thousands, hundreds of thousands of slaves, but neither here nor there. That still is how the country developed. And her indigo gives her a lot of credit for developing it. Now, she ends up marrying a man named Charles Pinckney. Now, that name might sound familiar to you learning about the American Revolution, but this is the father of the person you're thinking of. She marries Charles Pinckney, who is about 23 years older than she is, but he was widowed and, or his spouse had died and he married a younger woman. They seem to have had a happy marriage. They actually traveled to London for a while because Charles Pinckney acts as South Carolina's agent. Now, when they return, unfortunately, Charles passes away, but Eliza at this point had 2 children. I do want to also note before I move on to them that Eliza kept diaries throughout her life, and we know a lot about colonial South Carolina, first-hand accounts through her discussions, not only about her development of indigo, but about life in general at the time. Now, her and Charles had 2 children, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney and Thomas Pinckney. And these would be extremely important. Charles would sign the United States Constitution, and Pinckney would travel to Europe. He actually helped with the Jay Treaty in England before going to Spain and signing the Pinckney Treaty, which did a lot of the same things as the Jay Treaty. After that, they come home, and in the elections of 1796, Charles, I don't want to get them confused. Okay, between Charles and Thomas in the election of 1796, one was John Adams's vice presidential running mate, though we know that ended up being Thomas Jefferson, though they ran against each other. In 1800, one of the brothers was vice presidential candidate for John Adams. And in 1804 and 1808, I believe it was Thomas Pinckney was the Federalist candidate for president of the United States. So after George Washington left, in the first 4 elections after George Washington, one of her sons was either the vice presidential or presidential candidate for the Federalist Party for the United States of America. Eliza Pinckney is literally a founding mother in every fashion you look at it. She's an extraordinarily important person in the history of the United States, and I hope you now keep her in mind when you think about American history. TJ, she looks pretty too. It seems if she wasn't very common for the pictures. Well, TJ, that's not very nice of you. But I definitely understand what you're saying. This one, someone actually sent me a very nice postcard. I have it right here. And I don't want to forget your name. Jeannie, I believe it is. Sent me this very nice postcard a while ago and asked me to include the name of the artist who did the pictures. And I really want to. It's hard to get into my routine. It's very hard to find out who did some of these pictures. It's honestly very hard for me to confirm that they're even the right pictures of the right person. I don't put them up if I'm not sure, or I'd say 90% sure. I don't recall where I found this one, but I did see it in about a dozen places, which is how I was pretty confident it was her. It wasn't just like one website had the picture up, which I've been fooled before many years ago. So I don't recall who did this picture, but yes, she's lovely. Excuse me. All right, we're rocking right through here. Founder number 5, John Weissner. Now, I'll say again, I drink the water and it's like, oh, that's right, I have allergies all of a sudden. I'm getting old. Things are changing. Okay. Now, I didn't have a picture of John Weissner. This is a zoom in on a picture of the Continental Army at Newburgh, because it looks like a court-martial is going on. Tricked ya. Thank you for coming with me. All right. John Weissner is interesting too, so we'll get to. Excuse me. John Weissner, who was tried for cowardice during the Revolutionary War. Now, John Weissner was from a very prestigious family in a town about 80 miles north of New York City, just as the Revolution broke out. Actually, his uncle, Henry Weissner, was a member of the First and Second Continental Congresses, and even was there to approve on behalf of New York, when New York finally got around to it, independence. He voted yes for independence. However, he would leave before the signing of the Declaration, as many people did, to go back home and get to the work that they thought was important back home of an independent nation. So Henry was very important. John Weissner also joined up. He actually joined up as I believe, a captain in the Continental Army. Yes, a captain. Now, when the time came to fight, he went out to fight. Or at least everyone thought he was going to fight. You see, on September 22nd, 1776, he was part of a group instructed to attack I never pronounce it right, Montresor's Island in New York by boat. And they went out by cover of night, and they went by boat, and they were led by soon-to-be Major General Michael Jackson. Not that Michael Jackson, the one from the Continental Army. But unfortunately, they're sailing across, and John Weissner is not cut out for fighting, because he is seen hiding in the bottom of his boat. And the other captain on board sees this, and he starts kicking him and saying, dude, like, get up, man. We're literally going to fight right now. Like, you need to sit up. You need to lead these men. And apparently, Weissner had the fear and was not get up and was saying, stop kicking me, stop kicking me. And he starts saying, no, like, they have more weapons and there's more men than we were led to believe. Like, we're being sent, essentially saying they were being sent on a suicide mission. Now, the rest of the men in the boat heard about this because they were, in the boat with him. And they said, no, we can't do this. And they start saying, no, we would like, no, he's saying we're, and so much chaos erupts that the other captain, as I said, James Eldridge, decides, okay, like, these men cannot be led right now. And he decides to turn the boat around and sail away. Now, fortunately, I called him Major General. He would be a Major General, but Colonel Michael Jackson, his boat's already up ahead. And they can't send word to him. So he ends up going with his men in one boat by himself and suffers a horrific defeat where, fortunately, Jackson survives, if I recall correctly, but most of his men are killed, largely because they had no support. They should have easily, maybe not easily won this battle, but it should have been a fair fight, and it wasn't. So, they get back, everyone in the army hears about this, and John Weissner is very quickly court-martialed for, quote, cowardice and misbehavior. He's pretty quickly convicted, and there is a link in the article I put to notes about how the trial went, where essentially everyone is like, this guy's an idiot. What was he doing here? And he is quickly convicted and then cashiered, which means removed from the Continental Army and sent on his merry way. And he goes off to live his life and as a private citizen. He does later support the cause in various ways, just not military ways. Now, not everyone liked the fact that he was simply removed from the army. In fact, General Washington very specifically writes to the men who oversaw the court-martial saying, why wasn't this man hung? He should be hung for treason. Not even lashed, not even, as deserters would do, be court-martialed, hung. And he even asked the people who oversaw the court-martial to reconsider their decision. This, of course, was before double jeopardy was a thing, and you could be tried for the same crime more than once. Now, either way, the judges decide, no, we're going to spare his life because the only evidence of this crime was hearsay. Now, this is very strange because at the time there were no cameras or recording devices. They didn't have fingerprints or DNA. So most crimes were pretty much just hearsay, and there were a lot of witnesses going on. But to be fair, there were certain people who sided, certain men who fought for Weissner who sided with him and said, no, he was right in this situation, yada, yada, yada. And because there were enough people contradicting the pretty obvious argument that he had done some things wrong, he ends up being, as I said, cashiered out of the army and goes on to live his life with George Washington disappointed that he was still alive. That is the story of John Weissner. I hope I didn't call him Henry there. His name was John. I might have called him Henry on accident a few times. Please forgive me. All right. Speaking of Henrys, let's talk about a Henry. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm very embarrassed. Sniffly. Sniffly J. Manders. What are you going to do? Excuse me. Now it's more than sniffles. Okay, anyway. You're on camera. Anyway. All right. Henry Light Horse Harry Lee. What is it? All right. Henry Light Horse Harry Lee. Now, I do want to note getting into this. This is going to be a very brief overview because when I published this article yesterday, I was contacted by Ryan Coles, who wrote not just any book, but a book I read a while ago. I believe it was December. Light Horse Harry Lee: The Tragic Life of Robert E. Lee's Father. And Ryan Coles is going to come hang out with me on Monday, so look forward to a discussion, a very much more thorough discussion on Light Horse Harry Lee this next week. Till then, let's do a brief overview. Henry Lee was 20 years old and had just graduated Princeton when the Revolution broke out. Now, he was a member of the Lee family of Virginia, the Lee dynasty. He was a cousin to a lot of the more famous ones, Richard Henry Lee, Francis Lightfoot Lee, Arthur Lee, and even less famous than Light Horse Harry, William Lee. And the Lee family was extremely important to Virginia. They were important to the revolutionary cause. Light Horse Harry, he ends up joining the Continental Army as a young man. He's appointed as a lieutenant He makes his way up to lieutenant colonel, leading the Virginia Dragoons, which essentially was like a cavalry, except my understanding is the difference between cavalry and dragoons is cavalry comes in their horse and they stay on their horse when they fight. Dragoons ride on a horse and they get off the horse to fight. I know it doesn't sound that different nowadays, but based on the different weapons, they didn't really have armor, but they're different. The way they were outfitted made a difference at the time. So he led the Dragoons, and along the way he becomes known as Light Horse Harry Lee because he led the Light Horse Brigade. Anyway, there's a little blink from my computer. Got an email. Whoopsie daisy. He participates in just dozens of battles during the Revolution, becomes really respected for his actions. And in fact, after the Battle of Paulus Hook, where his small group of soldiers had a successful nighttime raid and captured about 150 British soldiers, he was given a gold medal by the Continental Congress. He ends up being in the Southern Department, like I said, just participating in so many different battles, and he's there at the victory of Yorktown. Afterward, he becomes a very important member of Virginia's state legislature. He is elected as a member of the Continental Congress for a little bit, and by 1786, he serves from 1786 to 1788, after which he goes to the Virginia Ratification Convention. He supports the Constitution, despite some of his relatives not, and then he goes on to be elected governor of Virginia for the maximum of 3 years, still in his 30s. He's governor of Virginia. He then joins the Whiskey Rebellion. Not the rebels, no, actually, he joins the other side of the Whiskey Rebellion, aka the George Washington. Sorry, a cat just came in. He joins George Washington to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, and on his way to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, well, what do you know? George Washington actually says, hey, Light Horse Harry, after marching the 13,000 soldiers across Pennsylvania, Washington steps back. He doesn't want to get shot. He's president. He needs to stay alive. So he has Light Horse Harry take over and bring the soldiers to the finish line. A lot of people credit Alexander Hamilton with this, but it was Light Horse Harry who was given this honor. He then, unfortunately, goes back to private life. He's appointed a major general in the army by John Adams, although the quasi-war doesn't really happen. It's more quasi than war. And then the Baltimore riots break out in 1812 because he didn't support the War of 1812. And unfortunately, what happens is Henry Lee, he goes to protect his friend's printing press, and a riot breaks out, the Baltimore riots, and he is one of the many people one of 3 or 4 people who get injured by the rioters trying to protect this printing press. He's actually then brought into brought around the corner into a jail. They're put into jail, not because they're criminals, for their protection. Unfortunately, Light Horse Harry Lee suffered real serious injuries for this. He survives, but he suffers what we would now know as PTSD for the remainder of his life. And, this is real unfortunate. He actually goes to the West Indies to try and recuperate, as was one of the many ways doctors healed patients at the time. Sadly, he is then, on his return trip from the West Indies, he passes away. What's really interesting about Light Horse Harry Lee is his son, because Light Horse Harry Lee has a son named Robert E. Lee. His cousin's Richard Henry Lee. His son is Robert E. Lee, who becomes one of the leaders of the Confederate Army during the United States Civil War. So that is an extraordinarily brief overview of Richard Henry Lee. Man, I keep calling him Richard Henry. Of Light Horse Harry Lee, who again, Ryan Coles is going to come on next week and give us a real thorough discussion on Richard Henry Lee. Light Horse Harry Lee. So I'm not going to talk too much about him right now. That is that. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll put you on mute. Sorry, guys. Cat kicked open the door and the baby monitor's on, and we're hearing some noise that we don't want to hear. So I apologize for that. Big Britches, it is interesting. It seems like you might have tuned in a little bit late. So if you are, we talked about John Pencil, who I said I was going to talk about for you a little bit earlier, John and Henry Pencil. So if you want to check that out, that would be, when we're done here, go back. I do release these in clips throughout the week too, so it will be out there throughout the week. I release the clips in the morning, just to variety's the spice of life. Any hoozle. Hi, kitty. Yeah, the kitty kicked in the door. There's just a whole mess of stuff going on. But we are going to bounce over. It's not so big deal. I'm sorry, I'm sorry we heard some noises for Richard Henry Lee, but like I said, we're getting a full explanation of him next week. Now we're going to kick over to our last founder of today, Ebenezer Denny. I do want to note that this is how I see his name spelled everywhere, but all the different things I use to type up my articles and publish on the website, everything said it was spelled wrong. I think there's supposed to be another E in there somewhere, but this is how he spelled it. So that's how we're spelling it. Let's talk about it. All right, one more sip of water. We're gonna make it. Wait. By the time the Revolutionary War broke out, Ebenezer Denny had already experienced carrying letters through the wilderness of the Pennsylvania frontier. In fact, there are even discussions that I saw that he would hide carrying the correspondence out to Fort Pitt and back. He'd hide in the woods by himself at night to stay away from any Native Americans or, animals or anything of that nature. So when the war breaks out, he joins the Patriot cause, of course. That's why we're talking about him here. And by 1778, he first actually joins as a privateer and sails on a privateer ship. And then he wants to go back out on another privateer ship. But in 1778, he's recruited into the Continental Army as an ensign, which is a word I think I pronounce wrong. People always tell me I pronounce it wrong. I sometimes say ensign. I apologize. It is the lowest level officer in the Continental Army, but it is an officer position, and that's why he takes it. Now, he served throughout the rest of the war, and even joins the Continental Army at the Siege of Yorktown. Now, Denny would keep journals throughout his entire life, and though I have him listed here as first mayor of Pittsburgh, which we will get to, he arguably is almost better known for his journals, because it's his journals from the Continental Army that especially at Yorktown, that we get very important firsthand accounts of, because he serves over by the Redoubt Number 10, where Alexander Hamilton famously led his charge. And in fact, if you listen to the Broadway musical Hamilton, they have certain lines in that talking about the waving the white handkerchief and the parapets, and those lines are drawn almost word for word from Ebenezer Denny's journal. They're not Hamilton's words, they are Denny's words. Still fine, I'm not criticizing the play, just thought you should know that. After Yorktown, Denny is one of the 100 or so people who actually stay in the United States Army after the Continental Army is disbanded. As such, he goes over to fight in the Northwest Indian War. Now, we've discussed recently some of this, Josiah Harmar we've discussed, and he joins Josiah Harmar and fights the Native Americans during Harmar's defeat in the Northwest Territory, what we now call the Old Northwest. Harmar's defeat is still one of the worst defeats to Native Americans in United States Army history, and he participates through it. And Denny's actually the person chosen to go back to Philadelphia and tell Congress, hey, guess what? We lost pretty bad. It wasn't very good. And now you might think he doesn't like Harmar for this, but apparently he does, because I do want to note Ebenezer Denny had a son named Harmar Denny. He named after his buddy there, who himself would go on to have a political career. But we're talking about Ebenezer right now. Ebenezer would return to the Northwest and stay with the Army. And he actually joined when Arthur St. Clair comes and takes over for Harmar. He joins Arthur St. Clair in his defeat to the Native Americans. St. Clair's defeat, which is even worse than Harmar's defeat. Now, at this point, Ebenezer Denny had been in the United States military for almost 15 years, a lot longer than almost any other soldier who fought in the Revolutionary War, at least on a consistent timeline. He does end up retiring before Anthony Wayne gets there and wins the whole thing, and he stays on the frontier, though. He ends up going to Pittsburgh, where he moves in the area around Fort Pitt. And I do want to do a side note, Ebenezer Denny's Journals of the Northwest Indian War is one of the main sources we have to look back on to find a contemporary resource discussing that war, just like the Revolutionary War. But anyway, Denny moves over to Pittsburgh. He spends about 3 decades building it from a frontier outpost. Pittsburgh was Fort Pitt. It was formed by George Washington just at the outbreak of the 7 Years' War as a small fort, and it grew into a bigger fort. And by the time Denny gets there, a town is built around this fort, and it develops into a city over 30 years or so. And the whole time Denny's there, he has small roles in the town council. He is treasurer for quite some time, and then in 1816, Pittsburgh finally gets incorporated as a city. And when it becomes incorporated, the first citizen they elect to be mayor is Ebenezer Denny. And Denny spends 2 years in this position until he resigns, citing poor health, which was common at the time. And he does, he lives another 6 or 7 years before passing away at a fairly old age in Pittsburgh. And that is the story of Ebenezer Denny, Revolutionary War journalist and first mayor of Pittsburgh. Although I shouldn't say journalist, that's the wrong word. I think I called him a recorder in the title of my article because he recorded it and, as I said, became the first mayor of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So that's that. I'll bring myself back over. Thank you for watching, guys. I really enjoyed this one. I think some of these stories are absolutely fascinating. I hope you did too. Take a sip of my water while I finish up here. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to either reach out right now or down below my links, email, social media accounts. As I said, I don't know, Britches, I don't know if you were here, if anyone missed it. We have a Discord channel that's a lot of fun. I do tank recommendations over there. I forgot to put the link in the description below because the Discord links only last for 24 hours anyway. So if you're interested, reach out to me on social media or email me, and I'll send you a link to join our nice little community that's growing over here. We have a fun memes page that Misfit really rocks over there. Ashley also puts in there too. A bunch of people have started contributing over there, so I do appreciate that. But I hope you guys enjoy it. TJ, it was fun. Thank you so much for coming. Don't forget, tomorrow, 8:15, trivia. It's going to be literally fun in games. So come on over for that. Take a little break from the tough history. Have some fun. See if we can name 243 founders. And other than that, I'll be back with you on another founder on Monday. Oh, wait. Excellent. We'll watch the stream after this ends. Cool. Check out the Discord. Yeah, let me know. I might be able to paste it right now. If you give me a second. Let me do that. Oh, don't switch. I'll invite people. Oh, we got a baby crying. Copy. Okay. I don't know if this will work. I know we've had some trouble, but there you go. Pasting it in. Hopefully it works. It'll work for 24 hours. If it doesn't work, like I said, contact me anywhere. Discord's fun. And that's that. And we end this stream with round bottom. So, round bottom.